You know that one historical fact you'd love to share at parties to sound smart? It's probably complete, unadulterated garbage. Today, we're not just correcting history, we're taking a sledgehammer to it. We're detonating 33 of the most persistent lies ever disguised as historical truth. Prepare for a full-scale demolition of your reality. 1. Napoleon Bonaparte. The original short king, right? The tiny tyrant with a massive ego who was basically compensating for everything? Well, it turns out history's most famous short joke is a complete lie. The man was about 5 feet 7, which was actually a bit taller than the average French guy at the time. So what gives? Simple. It was arguably the most successful smear campaign in history, courtesy of the British. Their newspapers relentlessly drew him as a pint-sized rage monster to make him seem less threatening. It was the 19th century equivalent of getting roasted online, 24/7. That, plus a classic mix-up between the French inch and the slightly shorter British inch, sealed his fate as history's most famous short guy. He wasn't a tiny terror. He was just the victim of a brutal meme war and bad unit conversion. 2. So, about Christmas on December 25th. Yeah, that date was basically pulled out of a hat. The Bible is completely silent on when Jesus was born, and the details it does give, like shepherds chilling in the fields with their flocks, point way more towards a spring birth. So why are we all exchanging gifts in the dead of winter? Because the early church pulled off a genius corporate takeover. The Romans already had a wildly popular, week-long pagan festival called Saturnalia, a bender of feasting, drinking, and pure chaos that conveniently ended around December 25th. Instead of trying to cancel the empire's favorite party, the church just went with the flow and slapped a major holy day right on top of it. It was a brilliant, if you can't beat 'em, rebrand 'em strategy. 3. Gladiators fighting to the death? That's probably the biggest lie Hollywood ever sold you about Rome. Sure, it happened, but it was incredibly rare. Why? Because it was just terrible business. Think of gladiators not as disposable cannon fodder, but as the Tom Bradys and LeBron Jameses of their day. They were superstar athletes who were astronomically expensive to buy, train, and keep healthy. Their owners weren't about to let their multi-million-dollar investment get turned into a shish kebab on his first outing. Most fights were more like a high-stakes boxing match, judged on points, skill, or ending at first blood. These guys were valuable assets in the NFL of ancient Rome, not just bodies to be thrown away for a cheap thrill. 4. The Great Pyramids were built by armies of miserable slaves being whipped under the desert sun. It's the story we all know, and it's completely, utterly wrong. So who actually built them? Paid, skilled, and surprisingly well-cared-for laborers. Archaeologists have found their purpose-built villages, and let me tell you, these guys had it good. Their graves show they received proper burials, and their skeletons reveal access to top-notch medical care. And the food? They were paid in bread, meat, and, get this, beer. We're talking about the best catering service in the Bronze Age. Forget brutal slavery. This was more like the world's most epic construction gig with a killer benefits package and a tomb with a view. 5. Close your eyes. Picture a Viking. Giant, filthy, wild beard. Horned helmet, right? Okay, now throw that entire image directly in the trash. That iconic horned helmet is about as historically accurate as a caveman riding a T-Rex. It was literally invented in the 1800s by a costume designer for an opera because he thought it looked cool. And the whole filthy barbarian thing? Please? Vikings were famously obsessed with personal grooming. We found tons of their combs, tweezers, and razors. In fact, English writers from that time complained that the Vikings were too clean, bathing weekly and meticulously grooming their hair, which made them dangerously popular with the local Anglo-Saxon women. They weren't savages. They were just well-groomed bad boys who happened to do a bit of raiding on the side. 6. Cleopatra, the ultimate queen of Egypt, the face of a North African empire, was not actually Egyptian. Not even a little bit. In fact, she was as Greek as baklava and smashing plates at a wedding. She was a descendant of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals who took over Egypt centuries before she was born. Her entire family, for 300 years, basically acted like Greek snobs on a long vacation. They spoke Greek, practiced Greek customs, and kept the bloodline pure by marrying their own siblings, creating a family tree that looked more like a wreath. Cleopatra was a political genius because she was the first and only one in her dynasty to actually bother learning the Egyptian language. It was a brilliant PR move, but by blood, she was 100% Greek. 7. A single clumsy cow belonging to a Mrs. O'Leary kicked over a lantern and burned down the entire city of Chicago. It's a great story, isn't it? Simple, memorable, and it blames an animal. Too bad it was a malicious lie, cooked up by a journalist who later admitted he just invented it because it made for a better story. The O'Learys were poor Irish immigrants, making them the perfect scapegoats. The truth is, nobody knows what started the Great Chicago Fire. The city was a tinderbox of wooden buildings during a drought. A stray cigar butt could have done it, but blaming a cow was just easier. Mrs. O'Leary was cleared of all blame, but her poor cow remains history's most unfairly slandered farm animal. 8. The idea that all medieval women were just helpless damsels locked in towers waiting for a knight is a fairy tale myth that needs to die. Yes, it was a patriarchal world, but calling all women powerless is just lazy history. Depending on her class, a woman could be a total boss. Noble women ran massive estates, commanded castles, and played politics like pros while their husbands were away. In towns, women were master brewers, weavers, and merchants who ran their own businesses and were respected members of guilds. And widows? They could inherit everything and become some of the most independent and economically powerful people around. It wasn't a feminist utopia, let's be real, but it was far from the boring one-dimensional prison our storybooks make it out to be. 9. The Spartans. The most hardcore society in history, right? So of course they had a policy of yeeting imperfect babies off a cliff. It's the ultimate symbol of their brutal, no-nonsense culture, a story that defines their entire legacy. There's just one tiny problem: they almost certainly didn't do it. This entire story comes from writers like Plutarch, who lived centuries after Sparta's glory days and was basically writing sensationalist history fan fiction. When archaeologists actually excavated the supposed chasm of death, they didn't find piles of baby bones. They found the remains of adult men, likely criminals or prisoners of war. Believing this myth is like a future historian writing about our era based solely on watching old episodes of Jackass. 10. Was there ever a magical time when a caveman could saddle up a triceratops and commute to his cave? According to some corners of the internet and the Flintstones, yes. For everyone else with a basic grasp of time, Yabba Dabba don't believe it. This isn't a small historical error. It's a chasm of geologic time. The last non-avian dinosaurs died out about 65 million years ago. The very first ancestors we might generously call human didn't show up until a mere 2 or 3 million years ago. That's a 63 million year gap. That's not like missing someone by a few minutes. That's like missing a party that ended before the planet your species would evolve on had even cooled down properly. 11. High noon, a dusty main street. Two stoic gunslingers, hands hovering over their Colts, ready for a lightning-fast draw. It's the single most iconic scene of the American Wild West, and it's almost pure fantasy. Real gunfights on the frontier were nothing like the slick duels in the movies. They were clumsy, chaotic, and often very stupid affairs. Forget the honorable stare-down. The reality was more like two drunk guys fumbling with their pistols behind a saloon, until one of them got shot in the back by the other guy's friend. And the legendary hero sheriffs who cleaned up towns with their dueling skills? Most were just local lawmen whose primary job was breaking up fistfights and arresting people for being drunk in public, not being Clint Eastwood. 12. The Viking Funeral. A mighty chieftain laid to rest in his longship, pushed out to sea, and sent to Valhalla in a blaze of glory by a single flaming arrow. It's arguably the most metal way to go out imaginable, and it looks incredible on screen. It's also a logistical nightmare that almost never happened. Seriously, just think about it for a second. You've got wind, waves, and a moving target. You're far more likely to miss entirely, set fire to the dock, Or just have a soggy, half-charred boat full of your dead chief float embarrassingly back to shore the next morning. While fire was part of their rituals, it was usually cremation on land. A longship was a massive investment. They weren't just going to turn it into a very expensive and very ineffective barbecue. 13. The story of Isaac Newton and the apple is so simple and perfect. He's just chilling under a tree. An apple bonks him on the head, and bam! A fully formed theory of universal gravitation downloads directly into his brain. It's a lovely story that makes genius seem so accessible, and that's exactly why it's a myth. Newton himself said he was inspired by seeing an apple fall from a tree, which merely got him thinking about the problem. The apple didn't provide the answer, it just provided the question. The actual discovery involved years of brain-meltingly complex mathematics and physics, not a piece of fruit acting as a divine slap to the head. Genius is less about getting hit by fruit and more about decades of hard work. 14. Everyone knows that in the Middle Ages, you were lucky if you lived to the ripe old age of 30, right? Life was nasty, brutish, and ridiculously short. Well, this is a classic case of statistics lying to you. That average life expectancy of 30-35 years is so low because it includes the absolutely horrific rates of infant and child mortality. A stomach bug or a fever that we'd crush with modern medicine was a death sentence for a medieval kid. But here's the twist. If you managed to survive the gauntlet of childhood and made it to your early 20s, your chances of living to see 60 or even 70 were actually surprisingly good. That average wasn't a death clock hanging over every 29-year-old. It was just really, really bad news for babies. 15. Walk the plank, you scurvy dog. It's the ultimate pirate threat, a moment of high drama where a captive is forced on a slow, terrifying march to their doom. It's in every pirate movie, book, and theme park ride, and it was almost completely made up. This theatrical punishment was largely popularized by writers like Robert Louis Stevenson for his novel Treasure Island, because it sounded dramatic. Real pirates were violent criminals, but they were also brutally practical businessmen. Why waste a perfectly good plank and all that time on pageantry? They were far more likely to just stab you, bash your head in, and chuck your body overboard. It's quicker, more efficient, and you don't have to clean up afterwards. 16. The Middle Ages. A time when everyone was caked in so much grime that a bar of soap was probably viewed as a mystical artifact. The stench must have been so bad it could knock a buzzard off a cart, right? Well, let's not get too smug with our modern showers. While they weren't bathing with artisanal lavender body wash, the idea they never bathed at all is just wrong. Soap, in various forms, existed. Public bathhouses, known as stews, were common in towns and cities. Cleanliness was also tied to religious piety. They understood the basic concept of getting clean. They just didn't have the luxury of our indoor plumbing. They weren't filthy savages. They just had a different, and probably much colder, definition of bath time. 17. In a Roman amphitheater, the ultimate power rests with a single gesture. A gladiator lies defeated in the sand, his fate hanging on the whim of the crowd and the emperor. A thumb pointed down, and it's lights out, right? That iconic thumbs down gesture, meaning death, is so deeply embedded in our culture that we use it every day to dislike YouTube videos. The only problem is, it almost certainly meant the exact opposite. Most historical evidence suggests that thumbs down, or pollice verso, was actually the signal to spare the gladiator, representing the sheathing of a sword. The gesture for death? It was likely a thumb pointed up, mimicking the act of unsheathing and stabbing. Or maybe just a fist. So every time you dislike a video, you're not condemning it. You're just channeling an ancient Roman emperor telling a gladiator, you know what? You're good, you can go. 18. Ask anyone what a ninja looks like and they'll describe the same thing. A silent assassin draped head to toe in a sleek all-black pajama set, melting into the shadows. It's the official uniform of movie ninjas everywhere. But if a real ninja in feudal Japan showed up for a secret mission dressed like that, he would have been laughed out of the province, right before being captured. Why? Because pure black doesn't exist in nature at night. Against a moonlit sky or a dark landscape, a solid black silhouette actually stands out more. Real ninjas, or shinobi, were masters of disguise and infiltration. They would dress as farmers, monks, merchants, anything that would let them blend in plain sight. For night missions, they wore navy blue or dark reddish brown, colors that actually dissolve into the darkness. That all-black look? That comes from Japanese kabuki theater, where stagehands dressed in black to signify they were invisible to the audience. We basically took the theater's stage crew uniform and called it history. 19. Catherine the Great of Russia. A powerful, intelligent, formidable empress who expanded her empire and oversaw a golden age. But what's the one fact everyone whispers about her? That her death involved a very unfortunate and physically impossible encounter with a horse. This disgusting rumor is one of history's most successful character assassinations, a piece of slander so vile and memorable that it has overshadowed her entire legacy. It was cooked up by her political enemies, specifically the French court, to portray her as a depraved, degenerate monster. The boring, completely unscandalous reality? She died of a stroke at the age of 67 while in her private chambers. The horse story was just a vicious lie, a weaponized piece of gossip designed to destroy the reputation of a powerful woman who dared to challenge the old boys club of European monarchs. 20. Thomas Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, the man who single-handedly invented the light bulb and brought light to the world. It's a foundational story of American ingenuity. But saying Edison invented the light bulb is like saying Christopher Columbus invented America. It conveniently ignores all the people who were already there. Dozens of inventors were working on electric lighting for 50 years before Edison. A man named Humphrey Davy created the first electric arc lamp way back in 1802. Joseph Swan, a British inventor, had a working incandescent bulb years before Edison and even sued him for patent infringement, and won. So what was Edison's real genius? He wasn't the first, but he was the best at making it practical. He didn't invent the light bulb. He perfected a commercially viable, long-lasting, and affordable one, and, crucially, built the entire electrical grid infrastructure needed to power it. He was less an inventor and more a genius systems engineer and a marketing machine. 21. Let's talk about the Trojan Horse, the sneakiest piece of military hardware in history. The Greeks, unable to breach the walls of Troy, build a giant wooden horse, hide their best soldiers inside, and leave it as a gift. The Trojans, in a moment of history's dumbest decision-making, wheel it into their city and, well, you know the rest. It's a fantastic story of cunning strategy. The problem is that giant hollow horse probably never existed. Most modern historians believe the story is a metaphor, a poetic exaggeration passed down by Homer. The horse was likely a powerful siege engine, perhaps a battering ram that was named the Horse. Or it could have been a metaphor for an earthquake that finally brought down Troy's mighty walls, since the god of earthquakes, Poseidon, was also the god of horses. It's a great story, but the reality was likely more about brute force engineering than brilliant equine carpentry. 22. Henry Ford, the man who invented the automobile and the assembly line. That's the story, right? The lone genius who put the world on wheels. Let's pump the brakes on that one. Ford invented neither. The first true automobile was patented by Carl Benz in Germany in 1886, when Henry Ford was still working on a farm. And the assembly line? That concept was used in Venetian shipyards in the 16th century and perfected by people like Ransom E. Olds in his own car factories years before Ford. So what did Ford actually do? He took the existing concept of the assembly line and supercharged it with ruthless, obsessive efficiency. His innovation wasn't inventing the car or the line. It was weaponizing the line to build cars so quickly and so cheaply that the average person could actually afford one. He didn't invent the product. He invented the mass market for it. 23. King Arthur, the noble king of Camelot, wielder of Excalibur, leader of the Knights of the Round Table. He is the quintessential British hero, the embodiment of chivalry and justice. And he is almost certainly a complete myth. There is not a single shred of contemporary archaeological or historical evidence to prove that a king named Arthur ever actually existed. The stories we know today are a mishmash of Welsh folklore, poetic embellishments, and romantic tales written centuries after he was supposed to have lived. He is likely a composite figure, a blend of several minor warlords and Celtic mythological heroes rolled into one legendary character. Was there a real Romano-British leader who fought the Anglo-Saxons? Possibly. Was his name Arthur, and did he have a wizard friend and a magical sword? Absolutely not. He wasn't a king. He was a legend, and there's a big difference. 24. The ultimate pirate dream. A weathered, salt-stained treasure map with an X marking the spot where a legendary pirate buried his chest of gold doubloons. It's the central plot of countless adventure stories. But if you're planning on quitting your job to go treasure hunting, I have some bad news. The whole idea of pirates routinely burying their treasure is a massive exaggeration, largely thanks to one guy, Captain Kidd. He did bury some treasure before being captured, hoping to use it as a bargaining chip, but he was a massive outlier. For the vast majority of pirates, burying your loot made zero sense. They were criminals who lived fast and died young. They didn't have retirement plans. Any plunder was immediately divided up amongst the crew and spent just as quickly on booze, gambling, and a good time in the nearest port. Why bury gold when you could be drinking it right now? 25. We've all seen the movies. Ancient Rome, a sea of majestic citizens draped in crisp, flowing white togas. It looks so elegant, so civilized. The reality? A toga was basically a formal straitjacket made from a giant, heavy bedsheet. It was a nightmare to put on, impossible to move in, and you'd need a team of specialists to clean it. It was the ancient world's equivalent of a ridiculously expensive, incredibly uncomfortable tuxedo that you only wore to impress people at weddings. For their actual lives, Romans wore tunics. What's a tunic? It was basically the hoodie and sweatpants of the ancient world. Simple, practical, and comfortable. Rome wasn't a 24/7 toga party. It was a city full of people who, like us, couldn't wait to get home and change into something that didn't require an instruction manual to wear. 26. The French Quasant. That perfect, buttery symbol of French culture. You can practically taste the Parisian morning air just thinking about it. Well, prepare to have your worldview shattered, because the French totally stole it. Yes, their national pastry is an illegal immigrant from Vienna, Austria. The original was called a kipferl, and it was shaped like a crescent to mock the Ottoman Empire's flag after a military victory. So how did this Austrian trophy snack become French? Some Austrian guy opened a bakery in Paris in the 1830s and got the city hooked on them like they were a new drug. French bakers, seeing a good thing, copied it, perfected it with puff pastry, and slapped a French name on it. It's the greatest culinary heist in history. 27. Let's talk about medieval hygiene, or the lack thereof. The story goes that you'd constantly hear "Gardez-vous" before being drenched in a shower of human waste from a window above. It's a fantastic, disgusting image. But think about it for a second. Are you really going to dump your own filth right outside your own front door? On your own house? Next to your neighbor who owns a very large sword? While it probably happened, it wasn't the norm. Most towns had public latrines or designated cesspits. Sure, these places were probably portals to new dimensions of stench and disease, but it was better than living in a constant sewage waterfall. The myth exists mostly to make us feel superior about our glorious modern toilets. 28. Why is the White House white? The most popular story is a tale of epic American defiance. The British burned it in 1812, so we painted it white to cover the scorch marks, like a middle finger made of paint. It's a fantastic story. It's also completely wrong. The truth is painfully boring. It was always white. From the moment construction started in 1792, they used a lime-based whitewash to protect the sandstone from the weather. People were already calling it the White House, years before the British even showed up with their matches. The paint job after the war wasn't a patriotic cover-up. It was just regular, boring home maintenance. It's the historical equivalent of finding out your superhero's origin story is that he just had to file his taxes. 29. The Titanic. The unsinkable ship, that single word, unsinkable, is the entire foundation of its tragic legend. It's the ultimate proof of human arrogance. Here's the crazy part. The company that built it, the White Star Line, never advertised it as unsinkable, not once. So where did the most famous fact about the Titanic come from? The media made it up after it sank. Journalists and magazines slap that label on the story because "unsinkable ship sinks" is a much better, much more ironic headline than "really big ship has terrible accident." They literally invented the hubris to make the tragedies sell more newspapers. It's one of the greatest pieces of fake news in history, and we all fell for it. 30. Atlantis. The legendary lost city, a super advanced civilization that vanished into the sea. People have wasted fortunes and lifetimes searching for it. And it's all been for nothing because you might as well be searching for the lost city of Oz. Atlantis was a complete invention by the philosopher Plato. He made it up for his book as a fictional example, a thought experiment. He basically wrote a sci-fi story about a perfect society that got greedy and was wiped out by the gods, all to make a philosophical point to his students. It was never meant to be a historical account. It was a cautionary tale, and Plato is probably still laughing in his grave at everyone who took his political fan fiction literally. 31. The Sphinx is missing its nose, and for centuries everyone has pointed the finger at Napoleon's troops, claiming they used it for cannon practice. It's a fun story, especially if you like blaming the French for things. But we have the receipts. We have drawings made by travelers decades before Napoleon was even born, and they all show the Sphinx was already noseless. The real culprit was likely a 14th century cleric who was absolutely furious that local peasants were worshipping what he saw as a giant pagan idol. So he allegedly took matters, and a chisel, into his own hands and performed some unauthorized facial reconstruction. It wasn't bored soldiers, it was one very angry man who really hated that statue. 32. Blackbeard, the terrifying demon of the seas. A blood-soaked pirate who killed hundreds and buried mountains of gold. Or was he? The real Blackbeard was less of a mass murderer and more of a master of theatrical marketing. The guy was a branding genius. The long black beard, literally woven with burning cannon fuses to create a cloud of smoke around his head? Pure psychological warfare. It was designed to make other crews so terrified that they'd surrender their ships without a single shot being fired, which is way more profitable and much less work. And his legendary buried treasure? A complete myth. Pirates spent their money as fast as they stole it on booze and parties. Blackbeard's real treasure wasn't gold. It was his killer brand image. 33. The Battle of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans versus 1,000,000 Persians. It's the ultimate underdog story, the reason people scream, "This is Sparta," at inappropriate moments. But history's bookkeepers have cooked the numbers a bit. First, it wasn't just 300 Spartans. They had about 4,000 other Greek allies fighting with them, but those guys get terrible billing in the movie posters of history. And the 1,000,000 Persians? That's what historians politely call a massive exaggeration. Modern estimates put the Persian army closer to 100,000 to 300,000. Now, don't get me wrong, those are still absolutely insane, suicidal odds. But it changes the story from a pure fantasy into a heroic, albeit doomed, last stand. It's still one of the most courageous acts in history. The math just got a Hollywood makeover. Alright, the video's over. Now for the historical confession booth. Go down to the comments and admit it. Which one of these lies have you passionately argued about, defending it to the death with friends or family, only to realize now you were spectacularly wrong? Consider yourselves officially rescued from the swamp of fake history. Your payment is a like. Subscribing is your insurance policy for the future. You know what to do.